Okay, so welcome to the second episode of the Golflete Podcast, and today's episode is with Mike Carroll. He is an Irish strength and conditioning coach who is currently in California. You may know him as Fit for Golf on Twitter and Instagram. He shares some fantastic content. And this was a really interesting episode, sort of just talking everything on golf strength and conditioning. Specifically, we discussed generating clubhead speed and how we can train for that, and also the 5 pillars of strength and conditioning for golf, which is actually an article that Mike wrote, and it is on the TPR website. So I will put the link below in the bio for that. So thank you for this, Mike. It was a fantastic interview. And I think there's something for everyone here, whether you are a strength conditioning coach, a golf coach, an amateur golfer, or a professional golfer. So yeah, enjoy.
Cool. We'll go for it. So,
very good.
Just very quickly, Mike, if that's all right, just to kickstart the podcast off, if you could just basically let the listeners know sort of your background, how you got into strength conditioning, and then specifically how you got into golf strength conditioning.
Yeah, I suppose pretty simple, really. I just played a lot of sports growing up. I grew up in Ireland, so played all the sports year round, and was always very interested in, I suppose, the physical aspect of them. So whether it was the speed or the fitness, and how the training could help them, basically. As I got a little bit older then, I had a brother that was a few years ahead of me in school, went and did exercise science in college, and I was pretty interested in the feedback that he was bringing back on the weekends when he was coming home, and I just decided then that it's something I'd like to do as well. So went and did exercise science in the University of Limerick, and pretty early on realised that strength and conditioning was the pathway I'd like to follow. And after my first year, I managed to pick up a part-time job in my local gym, a place called Fitness Works in Cork. And from there, then just started kind of taking on clients, basically. And branching into golf came about just that I played a little bit of golf as a teenager and had some friends that were pretty competitive players, and also knew a couple of golf coaches in the area. And that just led to me getting some golf clients, basically. About a year after that, I did the TPI level 1 just to try and get a little bit more educated in the area, and took on from there, really. And was based in Cork, doing that for about 3 years or so after college. And about 18 months ago, so October of 2016, I took a job with Hanson Fitness for Golf in Irvine in California. And I've been there since.
Cool. Happy days. So, I guess since you've sort of got into golf, have you seen a certain perception, maybe not from clients, but from other golfers that you maybe spoke to about sort of golf-specific strength conditioning? Like, I don't know what sort of perception you've seen. Maybe, I don't know if it's different in Ireland and America as well. So that'd be cool to have a listen to.
Well, I think it depends on the people that I'm working with as clients. They were all interested in it already, and that's kind of the reason they came. So they're usually pretty open-minded to the advice you give them, or just the philosophy that you would have in it. But that can be a little bit different then when you go, maybe if you just play golf with people kind of in a different setting. They often don't really understand the benefits or why it might be a good idea. And then even more so if you talk to non-golfers, they kind of find it very strange. They're usually thinking, what do you mean you're doing physical training with golfers? You're walking around hitting a ball. Yeah, like I'd have kind of some of the athletes from other sports, more field sport or track sports, that I keep in touch with back home. They'd sometimes be checking in, asking what I'm doing here, and I'd be telling them, and they're kind of, when you explain it, they say, yeah, I suppose I never really thought of it that way, but I can see why it would be important.
Cool. And I guess that kind of, it leads on sort of to the next question quite well. So, I mean, I hope this isn't putting you on the spot too much, but I actually read an article the other day of, it was the 5 pillars of golf strength conditioning coach. golf strength conditioning, and I was reading down it, and I saw that it was you that had actually wrote it on the TPR website. So I thought, all right, this works great. So, I mean, first of all, it's a great article for for anyone really that is into golf strength conditioning, or someone that doesn't really understand it, and you can actually see, the importance of it. So, I wonder if it's okay for you to maybe speak through those 5 pillars and maybe how that influences your programming, if that's
okay. Yeah, no problem. I think what's important, first of all, especially for people who maybe aren't very kind of up to speed with golf basically, or how golf works. And it's an interesting sport in that there's 2 sides of it that are nearly completely unrelated. So you have like the power side of the game, if you consider long shots, and then you have the short game where power isn't an issue. There's no advantage to having extra power. And when you take the power side of the game, all you're trying to do then really is just come up with what physical characteristics or attributes can aid in that. And sort of what I'm thinking of whenever I have a client is just trying to go through a checklist of those different physical qualities and see if they're kind of at a high proficiency level in each of them, I suppose. So the 5 things that I've broken it down to, and can be easy to get caught up in semantics, but the way I termed them was, number 1 was motor control or coordination, which is basically just saying, are you able to make your body do what you're intending it to do? Like, can you send the signal from your brain to the muscles to do the movement that someone's shown you, or the movement that you're actually trying to complete? The second one then that I've broken down is stability, which is essentially, can you keep certain things in place while other things are moving? So it's very similar to balance, as opposed to, I suppose, balance would be more of a static environment by definition, and then stability is can you keep in balance while you're moving. The third one that I would break down is mobility. So the checklist I kind of have for that is, can you bring your joints through the range of motion that you're trying to do, particularly in relation to the sporting activity. So, and this would be the golf swing. And then the last 2 are ones that I probably put more emphasis on than a lot of strength and conditioning coaches who are working with golfers, because I often see it as a big area for improvement, is strength and then speed and power.
Cool. And I mean, again, this leads on really well to the next question. So you said there's something that you maybe concentrate on a bit more that can have the biggest sort of improvement in someone's game, being obviously the strength and speed and power. So specifically, I mean, we spoke previously about your interest being around sort of physical training for improving clubhead speed. So I don't know if you could potentially, speak about obviously the benefits of that, which I think for most golfers are pretty obvious, but then also maybe, from someone that's relatively new to strength conditioning, how they can sort of introduce these training mechanisms into their game.
Yeah, so basically one of the reasons why I put a pretty big emphasis on strength training in the programs of the clients I deal with, it's not that I think it's not that I think mobility or stability are not worthy of training. It's just that most people, unless you're dealing with professionals, or even if you are dealing with professionals, their training time is very limited.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to give somebody a training plan where they can derive the most benefit from it without impacting on their practice time, or even just the other things they have to do, if it's an amateur, they've obviously their work and family commitments or whatever, is that if you can get somebody to a level where they're doing what I would call like the fundamental or basic strength movements with very good technique through a relatively large range of motion and with appreciable load relative to their strength level, you're getting a very good return on your training time. Like you're definitely going to be hitting your strength, obviously.
Yeah.
You're going to be improving your mobility if you're gradually progressing the range of motion and using good technique. For most people, unless they're already very highly trained, getting a little bit stronger is also going to be very important for improving their speed without even doing any focused speed training. Just improving their strength will help a little bit. And I also think it will help with the stability and the motor control, because even just by learning some of the exercises that are a little bit more complex, people get a feeling for, okay, this is how I move my hips in a certain way. This is how I gain better control of my shoulder. And kind of one of the cool things, going slightly off topic, that reminded me of that was a lot of the coaches that I liaise with players, they often say that the players become easier to coach when they've been following a training program. And I don't think it's just because they've got more mobile or just because they've got stronger. They just have a better understanding of how to move their body because they're doing a couple of training sessions a week where they're really, really focusing on, okay, I'm trying to move my hips in a certain way or my shoulders in a certain way. And it's a little bit different to golf practice because there's no fear of where the ball is going to go or a missed strike. Gives them a chance to solely concentrate on linking up their brain and their movement without really any failure involved. So they kind of buy into the moves basically.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really interesting way of looking at it, actually, especially the discussing the control of the body. And then just a sentence I sort of picked up on there was that the two were sort of gradually progressing. So it might be quite interesting to, and again, this might help sort of other coaches as well as amateurs, but maybe what, somebody that at the start of their strength conditioning sort of journey in golf, what a session for them might look like. I mean, you don't have to go into the nitty gritty, but, maybe just the structure of the session compared to someone that's maybe been involved in a high quality SSC program for a bit longer.
Give an example of both of them.
Yeah, potentially, just to see how the two compare.
Yeah, so in general, unless it's somebody who has like a very particular like injury or a very specific need, if you take kind of two training clients that would meet the masses, I suppose, the training structures for the beginner and the person who's been training for a little bit longer would be very similar in terms of structure and how they're broken down. I always start with a warm-up, which works as well as almost like a mini screen. And if anybody's familiar with the TPI movement screen, my warm-up comprises of a lot of those screening tests done for reps as a warm-up. And that would also hit the pillar number 1 that I talked about in that article, the motor control. So basically all I'm trying to do is get people warm and mobile and ready to train, but also kind of wake up their brains a little bit to some of the movements we're going to be doing later in the session under maybe higher speed or higher load. Then usually once they're warmed up, and the end of that warm up as well would generally cover like the stability stuff we're talking about as well. Yeah. That motor control and stability are pretty hard to separate, and some people would even argue they're the same thing, which is fair enough. So basically you're looking at some mobility, motor control, and stability work in the warm up, I would say, which takes about 15 minutes. If anybody has a very specific tightness or area limitation, they might spend a little bit of time on that first, loosening it out or getting it ready to go, like a hip or a shoulder that has a history of being problematic. Generally then, once they're warmed up, we go into some speed or power work. The reason we do that first is that you want to try and train this while you're very fresh. If you're trying to do speed and power work at the end of a training session when you're fatigued, you won't get quite the same benefit. So what that nearly always entails for my clients is some sort of jump variation to work on lower body power, or that would translate to ground force if the golf teachers or golfers are listening. And I usually pair that up then with some sort of medicine ball toss or throw, which would be more of a trunk and upper body dominant exercise. So a really simple way to think of, most people would be familiar with like a regular squat jump or vertical jump, just standing in pretty much an athletic position, crouching down and then jumping as high as you can. So that would be one exercise, usually done for somewhere between about 3 and 6 reps, but really high effort on each one. Then take a little bit of a break, just maybe 30 seconds or so, just to bring the heart rate down a little bit, and then go into the more trunk or upper body dominant one, which would typically be something like maybe a rotational medicine ball throw, or also called like a medicine scoop toss, which kind of looks like a maybe half or 3/4 golf swing. You're essentially just setting up side onto a wall or a partner and rotating the ball into the wall as hard as you can. That would generally be done for about 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps or 3 to 6 reps. And that would be the power section. So the two things that I really emphasize in the power are trying to get more force into the ground, often done by a jumping variation, and then more rotational power with the trunk essentially, and being eventually propelled by the arms with some sort of medicine ball throw or toss. Once that is done, I typically transition into more of a strength element of the workout. And with the strength stuff, I try and split it up into lower body, trunk, and upper body. Even though they'll generally all play off each other a little bit, I don't isolate them completely. So a pretty typical session there might be like a hip hinge or deadlift variation, trying to again work on ground force and lower body strength. And I suppose just like quickly for the people listening who aren't overly familiar, the big difference between training for speed and strength is that when you're training for speed, the load or the weight you'll be using will be quite low, but the speed of the movement will be quite high to try and improve how quickly you can apply or produce force. And then when you're training strength, the load will tend to be very high relative to your strength level. And because of that, the velocity or the speed of the movement will be a lot slower. Even though you're trying to move quickly, because the load is heavy relative to your strength level, you won't be able to move fast. I think that's an important point. You're trying to move quickly, but the weight is slowing you down. That would often be done then with maybe some form of cable rotation or anti-rotation exercise, like a standing cable rotation or a pull-off press or something like that, to more hit the trunk a little bit. And then usually there'd be an upper body exercise in there as well. Something like, it could be really simple depending on the person. Might be a very basic push-up or standing cable press or landmine press or dumbbell press or something like that. Nothing crazy. That would usually be done for, depending, this is where the advanced and the beginner client would probably differentiate a little bit, is that with beginning clients, I generally tend to keep them further away from their maximum strength. So because their technique there's too high a likelihood of their technique breaking down when the load goes up. So I usually keep them in somewhere between about 5 to 8 reps. But if their life depended on it, they could probably do 12 to 15 reps with that load. But you're really trying to make sure the technique doesn't break down. Then if it's more of an advanced client, someone who I have been training for a while or they have a background in it, and they're going to know that their technique doesn't change, it's just the load, they might have to do less reps or the load will have to come down. I might get them doing sets of 3 to 5 reps with a load that's much closer to the maximum weight they can lift for that amount of reps. And if that's the case, they generally do more sets. I often then, depending on how much time is left or how long the client has been training, is go into a second strength block, which would basically be something that would complement what we've just done. And I don't know if there's time to go completely into it, but basically if someone has done a double leg hip hinge or deadlift variation in the first block, I often like to get them to do a single leg or split stance squat variation in their second block. So an example would be if someone did say a hex bar hip hinge or deadlift in the first block, they'd often do like a step up or a step down or a lunge variation in the second block. If somebody had done some sort of rotational core exercise in the first block, in the second block, they'd probably be doing more of a stationary, maybe anti-extension exercise, which for most people is like a plank or a more advanced version of a plank, depending on the strength level. And then for the upper body exercise, if they had done an upper body push in the first block, like a push-up or a chest press or a cable press, then they'd generally be doing an upper body pull in the second block, like some sort of row exercise or some sort of pull-up exercise. And I'd often try and get the upper body stuff matching as well, that if the first block had a bilateral or double arm exercise, the second block has a single one. So trying to cover the major, I suppose, big moves, and also get one side at a time and 2 sides at a time in the exercises. So you get a chance to identify and work on big imbalances if they're there, and also just ensure that they don't materialize if they're not there. Usually then just a little bit of mobility work to finish, just some stretching and cool down stuff. And oftentimes, to be honest, that doesn't even happen. People just walk out of the gym after their second strength exercise, which I'm okay with, especially if they don't need to work on extra mobility stuff or they don't have time. I'm pretty okay with that. I'm not overly concerned with cool downs or stretching to finish workouts, to be honest.
Cool. That was some absolute sort of nuggets in there. That was fantastic. And I think that the information you're giving there, I mean, there's a lot that I've just taken from that, and I know that people will as well. So I've kind of got sort of one last sort of final serious question, and then I've got 3 just sort of final finishes that are just a bit more easygoing. So I guess, I mean, you've given a lot of information there, of actual training programs and maybe what they should look like. So just finish off with, you don't even have to go in that much detail, to be fair, but the sort of the pros of actually implementing this type of training within your golf practice, let's say, we'll call it that, over the negatives basically. So I don't know if you could touch on the actual pros and how they outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, so that's actually a good question and something that I've talked about a little bit before. When people consider physical training for golf, all they jump to immediately is, and it's one of the big things for definite, is clubhead speed or increased distance. That's definitely important, but there's a few other things that are vital too, especially for golfers who play or practice or travel a lot. And like the big one that I try to tell people is injury prevention. Like if you can get your body essentially working a little bit better, improve the mobility at the joints, the control of them, and increase your muscle tissue quality and strength, you're going to be able to practice and play more without getting tired or reducing the chance of injury. So basically, it'll give you a chance to practice at higher quality for longer, which gives you a decent chance to improve your skill level, which is what it essentially boils down to at the end of the day. The other one then that I think is very important is that if you're playing a long season or traveling, like it's just tiring. And just from speaking to pros who are on the road and things like that, there's often just the therapeutic benefits of it as well. If you're day in, day out, practice golf, really good just in terms of stress and mental fatigue, gives you a chance to freshen up and feel a little bit better. So they'd be kind of the 3 main ones. Like the injury prevention is definitely huge. Doesn't matter how good you are. If you're injured, you can't play. The second one is if you get yourself into better shape, you're able to practice at a higher quality for longer hours, which can have a huge impact on how well that you can actually play. And then the last one I think is you just feel a little bit better. And probably lastly, actually, that I should have mentioned is that it's also setting you up for a longer career at a higher level, because most people as they begin to age, probably after I would say early to mid 30s, depending on what training they're doing, they're starting to lose strength and power. So if you're training, it gives you a chance to keep your clubhead speed and power up into much later in your career, whether you're an amateur and professional, which is important for both how long you'll play golf and how long you'll enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely, one thing I'm quite interested to see, especially on that increased career thing, is that, the sort of the people on tour now that are using this Golf S&C, I think it's exciting to think what they may play like when they're, 50 compared to maybe some of the people that are on the senior tour now. I think it's going to be exciting. And then secondly, that therapeutic side of it. I mean, I know sort of Roy McIlroy, he's big on his physical training, and he says it's just that it is a confidence thing as well. That he stands over the ball and his his posture, and he feels more confident, which obviously we know how important the mental side of it is as well. So some fantastic inputs there. So just to finish off with, I finished these 3 questions just for a bit of fun, really. So question number 1. I mean, you play a bit of golf yourself, so one person you could take on a round, either dead or alive, and it don't have to be a golfer, it could be anyone. It could be a famous person. It's up to you.
Padraig Harrington.
I like it. Nice. So secondly, your pre-round music choice. Nice. And then to finish off with, where can people find you on social media, etc.?
Yeah, so Twitter is probably where I'm most active. It's at fit_for_golf. I have a website, fitforgolf.blog. They're probably the two best places to find me.
Cool. Happy days. And I must say to just everyone listening as well that I follow and you share some pretty good content. It helps me a lot as well. So, Mike, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic, and I really appreciate your time. It's taken us a while to get here with time zones, but we've finally got it cracked. So, thank you very much, man, and we'll keep in touch, and I'll catch you soon.
Yeah, no worries.
Cheers,
thank you very much for having me on, Dan. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much, man.
Bye bye.